Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome. Find a comfortable place, let your body relax, and allow the noise of your day to fade into the background. We are about to step out of our world, leaving behind its central heating and glowing screens, and journey back to a time when the coming of winter was not just an inconvenience, but a genuine and profound struggle for survival. Imagine the air, so crisp and cold it stings your lungs with every breath. Picture a sky the color of slate, and a sun that hangs low and weak on the horizon, offering light but no warmth. This was the reality of the medieval winter, a season of brutal hardship, but also of incredible resilience. So close your eyes, and let us travel back together. The change did not happen overnight. It was a slow, creeping dread that began in the heart of autumn. The last of the harvest, a precious bounty of grains, root vegetables, and hardy fruits, would be gathered with a sense of urgency. Every single grain of wheat, every withered apple, was a small victory against the looming enemy of hunger. The people of the village moved with a practiced rhythm, their lives dictated by the turning of the seasons in a way we can scarcely comprehend. The men would be in the fields from dawn until dusk, their scythes whispering through the last of the stalks. The women and children worked tirelessly, preserving the harvest. Cabbages were shredded and salted down in great barrels to make sauerkraut. Meats from the autumn slaughter of pigs and older cattle were heavily salted or smoked high in the rafters, turning them dark and tough, but ensuring they would last through the lean months ahead. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal, from the snout to the tail, was used. The fat was rendered into tallow for candles, a precious source of light against the encroaching darkness. As the days grew shorter, a different kind of work began. The forests, which in summer were places of dappled sunlight and foraging, became vital sources of fuel. Men and boys would venture out, axes in hand, to fell trees and gather firewood. This was not a casual task. It was a matter of life and death. The right to gather wood was often strictly controlled by the local lord, and a peasant caught taking more than his allotted share could face severe punishment. Yet, the risk was necessary. Without a steady supply of firewood, the hearth, the very heart of the medieval home, would go cold. And a cold hearth meant a cold family, vulnerable to the sicknesses that thrived in the winter damp. The landscape itself seemed to hold its breath, transforming from the vibrant greens and golds of autumn into a stark, monochrome world. The trees stood like skeletons against the gray sky, their bare branches reaching out as if in supplication. The rivers, once flowing with life, grew sluggish and then, one morning, would be stilled entirely, locked under a thick sheet of ice. For the children, this might bring a moment of wonder, a new and forbidden playground. But for the adults, it was another sign of their isolation. The frozen rivers meant that travel by boat was impossible, and the watermills that ground their precious grain into flour fell silent. The world shrank, with each village becoming an isolated island in a sea of white. And then, the snow would begin. At first, it might be a gentle flurry, a delicate dance of white flakes that dusted the thatched roofs and frozen fields. But soon, it would come with a relentless fury, a blinding blizzard that could rage for days, piling snow into massive drifts that buried fences, obscured paths, and sometimes even blocked the doors of their small homes. To be caught outside in such a storm was a death sentence. The world outside the cottage walls became a dangerous, alien landscape. Inside the typical peasant cottage, life was reduced to its most essential elements: warmth, food, and shelter. Imagine a single, small room, perhaps no larger than a modern living room. The floor was packed earth, cold and damp, strewn with straw that was rarely changed and became a haven for fleas and lice. There were no windows as we know them, perhaps only small, shuttered openings to let out the smoke and let in a sliver of daylight. In the center of this room was the hearth, an open fire pit over which a large cauldron of pottage would bubble away day and night. This thin, watery stew, made from whatever grains and dried vegetables were available, was the staple of their diet. It was often bland and monotonous, but it was warm, and it filled their empty bellies. The air inside was thick and heavy, a constant haze of wood smoke that stung the eyes and coated every surface with a layer of soot. The family, often including multiple generations, would live, eat, and sleep together in this one small space. At night, they would huddle together on straw mattresses, sharing their body heat to fight off the relentless chill that seeped through the wattle and daub walls. And they were not alone. To protect them from the cold and from predators, the family's most valuable livestock, a cow, a few sheep, or some chickens, were often brought inside to share the meager warmth. The smell, a pungent mix of smoke, unwashed bodies, and animal dung, would have been overwhelming. Days were defined by a simple, repetitive rhythm. With the fields frozen and outdoor work impossible, time was spent on indoor chores. The women would spin wool into thread, their fingers raw from the coarse fibers, their work illuminated by the flickering firelight or a single, smoky tallow candle. The men would mend their tools, carve wooden bowls, or repair leather harnesses, their hands skilled and patient. There was a quiet industry to these long winter hours, a sense of making and mending that was its own form of defiance against the decay of the world outside. For the children, winter was a time of confinement. Too cold and dangerous to play outside for long, they would be underfoot in the crowded cottage, learning the skills they would need to survive their own winters in the future. They would learn to card wool, to feed the animals, to fetch water from the icy well. But it was also a time for stories. In the long, dark evenings, as the wind howled outside, an elder might gather the children close to the fire and spin tales of brave knights, cunning tricksters, and ancient saints. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were a thread connecting them to their ancestors, a way of passing down wisdom, and a spark of imagination in a world that was often bleak and colorless. Now, let us leave the smoky confines of the peasant's cottage and travel to the great stone castle that looms on the hill. Here, life was different, but winter still presented a formidable challenge. While a lord and his family were shielded from the immediate threat of starvation, the cold was a more democratic force. A medieval castle, with its vast stone halls, high ceilings, and unglazed windows covered only by wooden shutters or oiled cloth, was notoriously difficult to heat. It was, in essence, a giant, drafty refrigerator. The heart of the castle was the Great Hall. Here, a massive fireplace, large enough for a person to stand in, would roar day and night. The consumption of firewood was staggering. Entire forests were managed simply to supply the castle with fuel. Servants would be in a constant procession, hauling huge logs to feed the insatiable flames. Yet, this warmth was deceptive. If you stood directly in front of the hearth, you might be roasting, but take a few steps away, and the biting chill of the stone walls would creep back into your bones. The nobility would dress in layers of rich wool and fur-lined robes, but still, they shivered. The private chambers of the lord and lady were smaller and slightly easier to warm, often equipped with their own fireplaces. Their beds were enormous four-poster structures, hung with heavy tapestries and curtains. These were not just for decoration. They created a small, enclosed space, a room within a room, that could trap body heat and offer some protection from the drafts. They would sleep with fur blankets and perhaps even a warmed stone wrapped in cloth at their feet, a medieval hot water bottle. Provisioning a castle for winter was a monumental logistical task. While the peasants worried about their small stores, the lord had to ensure there was enough food to feed his entire household, which could include his family, knights, men-at-arms, and a host of servants. The castle cellars would be packed with barrels of salted meat and fish, sacks of flour, and casks of ale and wine. Hunting parties would venture out into the frozen forests, seeking deer and wild boar, not just for sport, but as a vital source of fresh meat. Life in the castle was certainly more comfortable than in the village below, but it could also be tedious. The long winter months meant fewer visitors, less news from the outside world, and a general sense of confinement. To combat the boredom, the nobility found ways to entertain themselves. They played games like chess and backgammon, their boards often intricately carved from wood or ivory. Minstrels and storytellers were welcome guests, their songs and tales a welcome distraction from the monotony. The ladies of the castle would spend countless hours on embroidery and tapestry weaving, creating stunning works of art that depicted scenes of chivalry and romance. Despite these comforts, the dangers of the medieval winter were ever present, for rich and poor alike. The greatest of these dangers was sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of both the cottage and the castle, diseases could spread with terrifying speed. The common cold was a constant misery, but far more serious illnesses stalked the populace. Influenza, known then as the sweat or the ague, was a fearsome killer. Without any understanding of germs or viruses, and with no effective treatments, an outbreak could decimate a community. The winter of 1557, for instance, saw a virulent strain of influenza sweep across Europe, leaving a trail of death in its wake. Pneumonia was another stealthy predator, preying on those already weakened by malnutrition or other illnesses. The constant dampness and chill seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid. It was a slow, agonizing way to die, and it was tragically common. Children were the most vulnerable. With their developing immune systems and the harsh living conditions, winter was a perilous time for the young. It is a heartbreaking reality that in some parts of medieval Europe, as many as half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday, with the winter months claiming the highest toll. Then there was the ever-present threat of starvation. While the lord in his castle might have full cellars, a particularly long or harsh winter could exhaust even his supplies. For the peasants, the margin between survival and starvation was razor-thin. By February and March, the time they called the wolf months, their meager stores from the autumn harvest would be running dangerously low. They would be reduced to eating bread made with ground-up beans, peas, or even tree bark to make the flour last. The livestock, also suffering from a lack of fodder, would grow weak and thin. The sight of a starving child, their face pinched and their belly swollen from malnutrition, was a tragedy that played out in countless homes, year after year. History records periods of catastrophic famine, often triggered by severe weather. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was a particularly harrowing time. A period of unusually cold and rainy weather led to successive crop failures across northern Europe. The chronicles of the time paint a chilling picture of a society on the brink of collapse. People were reduced to eating their own horses and dogs. There are even grim accounts of cannibalism, of desperate people digging up the recently buried to eat their flesh. It was a time of unimaginable suffering, a stark reminder of how vulnerable medieval society was to the whims of nature. Fire was another constant danger. In a world lit by open flames and built largely of wood and thatch, the risk of a catastrophic fire was immense. A stray spark from the hearth, an overturned candle, could quickly ignite the dry straw on the floor or the thatched roof. In the tightly packed homes of a village or the crowded quarters of a town, a fire could spread with terrifying speed, devouring everything in its path. In winter, with people spending more time indoors and relying more heavily on fire for warmth and light, the danger was even greater. Yet, in the midst of all this darkness and hardship, the human spirit, with its remarkable capacity for hope and endurance, found ways to shine through. The medieval world was one of deeply held faith, and the church calendar provided a rhythm of rituals and celebrations that offered comfort and a sense of community. The bleakest part of the year was punctuated by a season of light and hope: Christmas. The Christmas season, or Christmastide, lasted for 12 days, from Christmas Day on December 25th to Epiphany on January 6th. This was a sacred time, a period when, by tradition, most work ceased. It was a much-needed respite from the daily grind of survival. Churches would be decorated with evergreens like holly and ivy, symbols of everlasting life in a seemingly dead world. The Yule log, a massive log chosen to burn in the hearth throughout the 12 days, was a central part of the celebration, its flames a symbol of the returning sun and the triumph of light over darkness. Feasting was, of course, a key element. Even the poorest families would try to save something special for Christmas, perhaps a small piece of preserved meat or some dried fruit for a sweet pudding. The wealthy, naturally, celebrated on a much grander scale. The lord of the manor would hold a great feast in his hall, and it was customary for him to invite his tenants to share in the meal.